And welcome back to our Ladies Bible Study. As promised, we're going to have part 2 this time of our study on influential women in the life of Moses. If you watched the last video, that was part 1. We talked about the midwives who were ordered by Pharaoh to kill all of the Hebrew babies that they were delivering, which they defied his order, and we learned all about that last time. And so in part 2, we're going to be talking about Jochebed. And by way of introduction, and I was thinking about sort of a theme of this lesson would be about giving up something that you love. Now, as Christians, I'm not really talking about, giving up a life of sin. We all give up the life of sin to be in Christ. But this is about giving up something that you love, something that you treasure, and the heartbreak in that. But having to trust in God, giving all your trust in Him, giving up and letting God rule in your life. Have you ever had to give up something that you loved? Imagine being a mom like Jochebed, having this little baby that you love, feeding him, caring for him, only to have no choice but to give him away when he's only 3 months old. This is the crisis in the life of Jochebed, the mother of Moses. I think about the idea of adoption when I think about this, because we have Pharaoh's daughter stepping in and raising Moses. And, adoption is a wonderful thing. A child without a home is given a home by loving parents and who love that child as if they were their own. It's a wonderful thing. He's loved just the same as if he were their own. And that's a beautiful thing. And at the same time, there's heartbreak there because there was a mother that had to give her child up. And it could be for any number of reasons. It's a heartbreaking thing. It's heartbreaking if she loved him and had no choice but to give him up because for whatever reason, circumstances wouldn't allow her to raise her own child. So she had to give the child up. It's a terrible, heartbreaking thing. And it's also heartbreaking if a mother has no love for a child and gives her child up for selfish reasons. It's heartbreaking in any case. But imagine being Jochebed and having that deep and abiding love for your little son and having to go through what she went through. So today we're going to talk about Jochebed and how she made the difficult decision to save the life of her child. So who was Jochebed? Well, we can turn over to Exodus chapter 2 to learn about that. I'm already there. I'm going to use my phone again. There went a man of the house of Levi and took to wife a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bare a son. And when she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. So we learn later in Exodus chapter 6, verse 20, it's Amram is the name of this Levite man. And he marries Jochebed, who was also of the tribe of Levi. And the name Jochebed means honor of God, or God is glory. So Amram and Jochebed, they have a child, and evidently these two were of great faith. The children of Israel, the Hebrew people, weren't always so faithful to God as we've seen in the Old Testament, the story of the ebb and flow of faithfulness of the children of Israel. But these two are evidently of great faith. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23 says, by faith they hid Moses. So we see they're people of faith. And what is the definition of faith? That's Hebrews 11, verse 1. It's the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So we're going to see in a few moments about Jochebed's faith, and we're going to see her faith in her actions that she takes. So Moses is born here in Exodus chapter 2, verses 1 through 2. And it says that, Moses was a beautiful child. It says that he was a goodly child. So evidently, Moses' parents saw something special in this little child. Something different. And maybe Jochebed had a feeling, had a sense that he was special and that he could do great things and that he was destined for something better. So we can see that she takes special care to hide him for the first 3 months. Understanding that, remember in our study of the midwives, where Pharaoh first commanded them to start killing the Hebrew children that they were supposed to be delivering of the Hebrew women, and they refused to do that, and we learned all about that, and therefore, Moses is born, but Pharaoh's still at it. I mean, he hasn't given up. He's ordering now that baby boys be thrown into the Nile River. So this is going on, and imagine the terror in that. And so she's hiding Moses but how long can you hide a child? They're busy, they're vocal, it was inevitable that someone is going to find out that he is there. So, she has to make this difficult choice. She holds on to him as long as she can, but she devises this plan, and I'm going to call it the basket plan. Exodus chapter 2, verses 3 through 4. I'm going to look at that real quick. You can turn there if you'd like. Exodus 2, 3 and 4. When she could no longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes and dabbed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. And his sister stood afar off to wit what would be done with him. So she takes this basket and basically makes it a little waterproof boat for him. Now, she can either keep Moses and wait for the authorities to arrive and just rip him from her arms and go through that horror, or she can leave him in God's hands, which is what she's doing here. I don't know what's going on in her mind. She can't possibly know what's going to happen. She's a woman of faith, though. We have to remember, it says she's a woman of faith. She couldn't see the outcome. We're not told she had any assurance that anyone's going to find Moses in his little basket, that he's going to be saved. How could she know that down, one day or the next day or that day or whenever it is, that there's going to be a woman out there that's going to rescue him? She has no assurance of this. I don't know what's going through her mind at this point. She's just giving him over to God is the way I see it. But she has to be going through turmoil. She has to be. Just imagine yourself in her shoes, even though we like to think of ourselves as women of great faith. Just imagine this trying time for her, even as she's making this little boat in the contemplation of what she's doing. She has no assurance. She just has her faith, and she's walking by that. We're not told what she's thinking, but as mothers, we can definitely feel the pain. Can you imagine just putting him in the little boat and, placing him in there in the reeds and walking away and having to go back home? I mean, imagine trying to go to sleep that night. I know I wouldn't be able to. I don't know that she did. I can imagine she was probably fervently just talking to God and praying to God for his deliverance in this situation. Now she places him in, it says flags here in this version, but you think of some tall reeds in the riverbank there. This would have been like a shallow water area. It's not in the currents of the river, so he's not just going to be swept away down the river and, for the crocodiles to find and who knows what all. He's in there. He's in a shady area, as protected as she could think of to do for him in that moment. And she had to just let him go there and walk away and trust. So Pharaoh's daughter comes upon the scene. Well, Pharaoh had evidently a lot of daughters, but there's just this one in particular that is coming down to, just so happens, down to the river to bathe in it. From what I understand, it was customary of Egyptians to come and bathe in the Nile River because they felt that the Nile River had magical properties. So, this would have been a regular thing. And so she's down in there bathing, her attendants are with her. And so she goes in there and she spies this basket. So she tells her attendants to come and retrieve the basket. And then he cries out and she has compassion for him. She's moved by compassion. And so she determines to take him in as her own. Of course, we know that Miriam, the sister of Moses, is in the area, and we'll get to her part probably in the next lesson. We'll talk more about Miriam. But so here we have, it's interesting, yet another woman defying the orders of Pharaoh, and it's his own daughter this time. She's defying the order. She knows that this is one of the Hebrew children. She declares that this is one of the Hebrew children. But yet, she's moved by that womanly feeling, that mothering instinct that God gave women. We have these emotions God gave us as women, and when used properly, they can greatly influence others. We have this mothering instinct that allows us to be moved with the, especially with the plight of children. We have an innate desire to care for them. So we see, again, God's providence at work here, because we have Jochebed just moved by faith, putting the situation, which seems like an impossible situation, because see, this is where God really shines, is in all of the impossible situations that become possible with God. We know the scripture, with God all things are possible. Like Jesus said, with men it's impossible, with God all things are possible. All of the infants are being thrown into the Nile. Here's Jochebed, she's full of faith, she's dedicated to God. She's got this blessing from God, this beautiful son that she says, she's thinking what a goodly child he is. He's not ordinary. He's beautiful. There's something special about him, and God just can't let this thing happen to him. So, she just devises this wonderful plan. But again, she's moving totally on her faith to guide her. She has no assurances, remember that. And then with all of these women, they're acting on their faith. The midwives did as well. They didn't know if they were going to be put to death for disobeying the orders of Pharaoh or not, but they were not. God blessed them. But they couldn't have seen that way. We can't see the future. And so they moved on faith. She's moving on faith. And here's all of these. Providence is interesting because it seems like things that are just happenstance, that just so happens that, Pharaoh's daughter is there. Just so happens that she's right there where these reeds are and sees this basket. We don't have to say, well, what if she didn't? This is God. This is God's providence. This is God at work. So she's, and her spirit as well. She is moved with compassion, even though she knows it's a Hebrew child, even though she knows her own father has declared that all these children should be put to death. And so when you think about that, once again, Pharaoh is powerless against the will of the Almighty God. because the daughter isn't punished, and Moses isn't, ripped from her arms either and disposed of. He is brought into the royal palace, and he is raised by Pharaoh's daughter. And we understand that there is a time, which we're going to get to in a moment, where Jochebed is going to be reunited with Moses. Again, something she could not have anticipated. I titled this little section at the end here, "A letting go in order to gain." We know Moses' sister Miriam. She's there, and she appears, and she talks to the princess, and is instrumental in recommending her mother for being a nurse for the baby, because obviously the princess could not. We'll talk about Miriam's role in another study. But, Jochebed is blessed to be able to have a part in these formative years of Moses' life, because she's there to nurse him, and she's also there in these first few years to influence him, to tell him about where he's actually from, and to teach him these ways when he's little. We see her influence in his fierce loyalty to his own people when we're told that he sees the Hebrew slave being abused by an Egyptian, and he rises up and he kills the Egyptian, and of course that he changes his path forever at that point. The Bible says that he chose to align himself with the people of God rather to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. So he will ultimately reject the Egyptian way of life, and the sequential chapters of his life, God will choose him to confront Pharaoh, and which is all very interesting. You can just see in this circle that God created, where of all things he would be taken care of and nurtured and raised in the house of Pharaoh, and then later on in his life he's going to be the one who is going to confront the reigning Pharaoh at the time when he's older. He's going to tell them to let his people go, and he's going to lead the people out of bondage. And so you think of all that amazing stuff that will follow in the life of Moses, and Jochebed has a direct influence over all of that. If it weren't for her and her great faith and her God's providence working, that she could have him alive and still have that very, albeit too brief probably, period of time where she has this influence over him, it's enough. And yet I still think it's kind of bittersweet, because she obviously doesn't get to raise him to an adult and spend all those years with him, but I'm sure she just thanked God every day that she was able to save him, or with God's power, with God's help, and that he was able to rise to such greatness, and that she was able to have that influence over him just by being a caring mother. But she had to let go and trust in order for all that to happen. And so, we have to think about our own lives. If there's areas where we sometimes have to let go, maybe of a job we liked, or any number of other things in our lives that we just have to trust God and let go of. And I was reminded during this study of just a little funny story from my own family about giving up in order to gain. When Shannon was little, she had this doll that she just loved, a Barbie doll. And if you know anything about the Lord of the Rings, there's this elf princess, Galadriel, and she had this special doll with this beautiful white gown and the long hair, and she loved this doll. She loved Lord of the Rings. She still does. And one day we were trying to teach her a lesson about giving and, to the less fortunate. And we talked about how, you don't just give your junk, you give something that may even be precious to you, like God gave his son precious to him, so that we could have hope and we could be saved. So, you try to give of your best, giving to people that have needs. And David asked Shannon to go in her room and pick out something that she might like to give to another child that was in need. And she went and she chose her favorite doll, Galadriel. And so we took that, and she didn't seem too upset by it. I mean, I know that must have been hard for her. It was her favorite doll. And Christmas comes along, and unbeknownst to us, my sister Lynn, Shannon's aunt, had bought a Christmas present for Shannon, and lo and behold, she opens that up, and there is Galadriel. So we just had to talk about it, and we said, look, there's a prime example that you gave, and you didn't know that this was coming, and God blessed you, and he gave you right back again. So, in our lives, that's really hard. I mean, we, even in our giving on Sunday mornings, when we give back to God, for some people that might not be hard to do. For some people are so blessed by God and they give generously, and it's no problem for them. And then there are those that give and it hurts to give, because they're looking at their money and they're thinking, I've got all these bills to pay, and I'm living paycheck to paycheck, but I know God has said that he's going to bless me anyway, and you just give, and God takes care of us when we do that. But sometimes it's not easy. We can't, gloss over it and say, this is easy. This could not have been easy for Jochebed to do what she did in giving Moses away like that, and just trusting in God that something good was going to come. She could not see that something good that was going to come. So in our lives, it's the same. We may be going through difficult times, and sometimes there are things we just have to give up, and sometimes that's really hard. But especially if it's something that you really cherish, sometimes you might have to move out of that fancy home that you had and move into something more modest because times were tough and somebody lost a job, and who knows what the issue can be. Everybody gets hit by something. There's some point that comes to everybody's life, or even a lot more than once, but that we have to just act purely on faith. Every day you step out of your door, you never know what that day is going to entail. And so we get behind the wheel of our car and we drive and we go and we put our trust in God and not in things. So, can we do the same thing? Can we let God take the wheel and drive our lives for us? Because we all like to think we've just got things under control, but we don't. There's going to come that hard time where you're wondering what's going on and what do I do? You just have to act on faith. So just think about that this week, and think about ways that you can maybe try to let go of some kind of things you're trying to control, and just trust in God that he will work things out. Easier said than done, but it can be done. And I think if you look at this beautiful mother, Jochebed, that it will give you some inspiration, it'll give you some help. I don't really think we think about Jochebed too much. I was thinking about it. I don't know that I've ever heard a whole lesson just about her. And maybe you have. You could very well have. It's not a name that we hear mentioned very often, but just think about what this mother did. And once again, like the midwife's actions had this far-reaching consequence, her actions have that consequence too. Just think of all the great things that Moses did, and if he didn't have a loving, beautiful mother like her, he could not have done them. I mean, he wouldn't have even been taught about his own people and all of the God and all of that if he had purely just been raised in Pharaoh's home without her influence. So he was allowed a beautiful upbringing and riches and education and everything he needed to escape Pharaoh's wrath right under Pharaoh's nose. And he had this beautiful mother who was full of faith, who was able to have this great influence on his life. And Moses is somebody that will never be forgotten, and hopefully Jochebed will never be forgotten. I mean, don't let her be forgotten. Remember what she did and think about your own life, and maybe she can give you some inspiration in things that you might be going through right now. So next time, we're going to talk more about Miriam, and we're eventually going to talk about Moses' wife. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you've gotten something out of this lesson. And God bless you all.